Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV. HFO-TV is co-sponsored by J.R. Johnson LLC, specialists in multifamily restoration and repair work. Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. And today we have with us back, it's been many years, Mike Vaughn, Director and Assessor at Multnomah County. We're going to talk a little bit about the complex arena of property taxes in the state of Oregon and Multnomah County. So, Mike, thanks for taking the time to come back and visit with us.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
I know, Oregon's unique in some regards and not in others, but a question we get a lot is kind of how property taxes are, figured out and things like that. So I thought we could dig down and a little bit of that and then talk some of the nuances between, Oregon, other states and things like that. So I guess first off, one thing that comes up, I know, is there's a perception that taxes can only go up 3%. And maybe we could shine some light on that and then talk about what happens on a sale and things like that. So,
thanks, Greg. Yeah, I, again, love when the community and the stakeholders reach out to me. Oregon is one of the most complex tax systems in the United States, in my opinion. And so to help explain it and work through it, I've had over 20 years experience working in Oregon's property tax system.
Has it always been so complex, or is it just over time compared to other? I mean, is there a reason from your point of view of why we've got to where we are? Well,
I mean, that's a huge conversation. Yeah. That may be a whole nother meeting. But I think just at a high level, really our property tax situation really came out of the 80s.
Right.
We had a lot of high inflation. We had high interest rates. We had, in terms of how the public perceived it, we had public government budgets that were, running high. And so that was creating a system where property taxes were not able to be anticipated year from year. They would fluctuate wildly. They would go up real high. Like right now, one of our highest rates in Portland is $27 per thousand. Well, back in the 80s, it reached $45 per thousand. So there was a lot of irritation with the property tax system, and so that really became the basis for the 1990s. And the 1990s is where Oregon currently gets its property tax laws that we administer today. Why it makes it so complex is because obviously laws that were written 40 years ago, didn't anticipate the environment we have today, in addition to all the laws that get added subsequent to the initial, I'll call base laws or system laws that we're sort of operating in.
Okay.
So as we get new laws added on, we have to sort of
again and again.
We have to keep trying to figure out how to administer that in my office. So, and that's basically what this presentation is. Oftentimes I bring it to neighborhood associations. I'll go out to realtor groups, any kind of interested stakeholder group, law firms, they'll have me come in and do a talk on how we administer it. So this is really what this is meant to be, is sort of a high-level overview.
Good. Okay.
And then answer a lot of the basic, the questions that you're going to have, that are typical. Property tax is pretty simple. It's the administration of Oregon revised statutes, so Oregon laws that fund the local community. So a lot of what I do in my office is math. I take laws and I create math formulas out of them, and that's really where I think folks start glazing over and going, okay, wonderful. But it really is a fascinating challenge, to take a law that was written in 1990 and then try to make it apply today and show it mathematically on your tax statement. So that's why, for me, these types of things, getting out into communities, answering questions are important because it is complex, but I want to try to make it simple.
Oh, good. Okay.
So property tax, very simple. It's just a math equation. So we take a rate and we multiply it by a value. Now, a lot of what I want to talk about today is defining what is the rate or the budgets and then what
the value is.
The value that we use for the tax purposes.
Right. And is that set? I mean, is the rate set up? I mean, how does the rate component, as you said, there's one spot that's 20 per thousand. I mean, is it neighborhood by neighborhood? How does that all set up? Moving forward as people look. I mean, we know other states, Texas, where you've got these huge fluctuation of property taxes. We don't really seem to have that as much, but curious on where that rate part comes in.
Yeah, that's a great question. We get this all the time. So in Multnomah County, we have 64 taxing districts, and these are districts that are authorized by Oregon law to fund their operations through levying a property tax. So every year, these districts, which are school districts, the cities, the county, we get water, sewer districts, fire districts. There's 64 of them. Throughout Multnomah County. And obviously, wherever you're living, you're not paying taxes to 64 districts. It's who's ever providing the service to
that
you.
Particular location.
Most people kind of really get the school, district concept. So if you live in a boundary, your children or your neighbor's children go to that school. That's kind of how every district works. If you live in a certain area, if you live in the city of Portland provides you service. If you live in Corbett,
you've got you have layered on top and some.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
So most taxpayers will have 12 to 13 districts that they're actually responsible for a portion of their budget to provide a service.
Gotcha. Okay.
So how the rates are collected is each year districts go through a public budgeting process. It's right now, actually, they're going through it and they're developing what their priorities are, taking input through public hearings. I have zero involvement. I'm not involved.
Right, you guys don't do anything?
I don't oversee any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so the districts then collect, they get all the feedback and they say, this is our budget, this is our priority. Once they adopt it and it's certified to me, I then turn that into a rate. And so when you see your tax bill, and we'll probably look at one if we have enough time today, kind of a tax bill that kind of brings all this together. So we'll collect all those rates, and on a tax bill, you'll see all the districts that are providing you a service.
And then the math problem comes in where you're taking that rate and multiplying it by the value. Got it. Well, I know one thing that always comes up is these so-called, hey, there's a 3% limit on property taxes. I mean, we'll hear a lot, in our world, we'll hear a lot about that as we're talking about expenses and operational expenses that we get pushback that, what do you mean your expenses are going up? Property taxes only can go up 3% because of the statute. Maybe you can shine some light on, really what does that really mean? So
slide 3, now this is an animation that I've spent half hour creating. So I'm real proud of this one.
Right.
And it's really a question that when I'm out meeting with neighborhoods, I say, okay, here's a question. Is there a 3% limit on property tax from one year to the next? And most people will say exactly what you're saying. I've heard my realtor told, something that says, no. That is absolutely false. There is no limit in Oregon law that limits property tax growth from one year to the next. And so if there is anything you take away from this presentation, it's that it doesn't exist. We want to make sure that folks understand that we have to administer the law as written, and there is no limit. So your taxes, and I think if you live in Portland over the last few years, you might have seen tax increases 10, 11, 12%. And I'll explain to you why that is. But
so where was that 3%? Is that coming from the statute that was written that the assessed value can't go up more than 3%, and that's where it's not factoring in the other components?
Slide 4. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Okay. So there are limits.
Right.
And this is the 1990s that I was talking about.
That you guys are now having to craft things around that.
So 1990, we saw what's referred to today as Measure 5.
Right.
And what was limited by voters that amended Oregon's Constitution at that time was what amount could be collected for districts. So school districts were limited to collecting this is on a per property basis, no more than $5 per thousand of the property's market value. So that was put in Oregon's Constitution. That's a limit. The second thing that was limited were general government. So general government can collect no more than $10 per thousand of a property's market value.
Are we one of the few states that has that limit?
As far as I'm concerned, yeah. Okay, I haven't seen another state that does it that way. There are two ways that you collect property taxes. One is levying and the other is rate. So we're a rate-driven system in Oregon, so that's not uncommon. But having a limit on the amount of rate, I have not heard of
Interesting,
before.
Okay.
Yeah, so voters adopted in 1990. So if you're thinking property tax, you have, again, the math equation of rate times value. So in 1990, they limited the rate.
Gotcha.
They said districts can collect no more than this, and that's the first limit.
Okay.
So then the math equation has two components. It's a product of the rate times the value. So in 1997, voters amended the Constitution to limit the value. And that's where the Oregon's Constitution sets that we have to establish 3 values on a property. The first is a market value. That's not new, right? That's whatever the market's willing to bear for your property. The second value that we created is formulaic. It's basically a formula derived from the market value. It's known as the maximum assessed value. Again, it's a constitutional term.
Okay.
And once this value is created, it can only grow at 3%
So that's
per year.
where the 3% number comes from that measure back in 1997.
But with any rule or law, there is an exception to that rule.
Right.
So in this particular case, there are 6 exceptions to that 3% rule, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then the third value that that we have to maintain on every property is the assessed value, which is the value used for tax purposes. It's taxable value. And it's simple that the maximum assessed value is a formula from the market value. And once it's created, it doesn't grow more than 3%.
Gotcha.
The assessed value is just the smaller of those 2 numbers that we use for the tax calculation.
So the market assessed value is not necessarily the value for the tax calculation. It's that's just a formula based on the market value.
It could be. It could be, yeah. It just depends on which is smaller. So
Gotcha,
in rising markets where values are going up, you would expect the maximum assessed value to also be the assessed value. But in declining markets where market value may be dropping, you may see the assessed value and the real market value be equivalent.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So again, it's not the most because we hear a lot about Measure 50 and the tax code changing in 97 and moving back to the assessed values of, I think they went back to the values of 95, and then people hearing that there's this 3% cap on increase, and then from a lot of clients will ask about the reassessment on sale. Does taxable value get reassessed on sale? The market value may, but not the assessed value for taxes may not get reassessed on sale.
That's right. So once the maximum assessed value is created, unless there's a physical change to property, it basically grows at 3% per year.
Gotcha.
So it can never be reassessed on sale. It can never grow more than 3% unless you do something physical to change your property.
Significant improvement.
Right. A vacant land and you build a house. So obviously the maximum assessed value prior to the house was just on the land.
Right.
So they needed to capture the improvements in the taxable value. And so that would be an example of a physical change to the property.
And that's different than, being where we are in Oregon, different than California, which had the limitation, but then if the sales, there's a reassessment.
Right.
That's where we kind of differed when we passed because I think our bill came after California, if I remember correctly.
Prop 18?
Yeah.
I think, after.
Yeah. So kind of like they modeled it kind of a California, but then did a little tweak to it.
And we hear it all the time. I just moved from California, and I heard, you're supposed to reassess, and then we have to sort of let them know that Oregon doesn't follow California's rule. Right. Yeah. Okay.
And then so in terms of, in the market value, what do you guys do in terms of discovering the market value of a property?
That's one of the biggest challenges we have. We have in our office about 40 appraisers, and there's over 315,000 accounts in the county that we have to maintain values on every year, right? So, we can't go out and inspect every house or every commercial property. We have to basically make a resource judgment decision on where we're going to invest our appraiser time. Basically, they're looking for making sure that our assessment records are accurate. So if there is an inventory change, like we had, bare land and there's a house built, we want to make sure we go out to that property, collect the information so that we can develop a market value on that property. But generally, if there isn't a change to property and, there hasn't been a sale and there's been no permits pulled on improvements, we're basically maintaining values through statistics.
Gotcha,
and this is where it gets a lot of folks, well, how is my value so far off, right? That's usually a common, I'll say, a critique of our office.
But again, that they're looking at the market value, not okay.
Well, and they'll say that my property sold for $5,000 or $10,000 less than what you have, or $50,000 more. We rarely hear that one, but usually it's a lot less. And, we say, well, it may be wrong. And, in statistics, you're dealing with averages, you're dealing with, trends. If something moves up or down 10%, you might apply that to an entire market area. But your particular property may not fit that analysis very well. And so maybe instead of going up 10%, it would have went down 5%. And so we're constantly trying to engage with the public to help us understand where we got it wrong. It's not, we don't take it personal. We're just trying to get it right.
Right.
Because again, this is to support the districts. It's not our office. We're not making up. We're just trying to make sure we get it right because districts are providing you the service. So if you've changed your property and we didn't capture that, which is possible, one thing I like to toss around to the policymakers is we approach roughly 30,000 properties a year, and we say, look, we're trying to reappraise your property. Can we come take a look at it? Only about 15 to 20% of the owners actually allow us on property. So oftentimes we're making a lot of decisions from the street corners.
So drive-by,
drive-by
appraisal.
Right. So
yeah.
Is it a finished attic? Is it, we're trying to, and that's for the residential. I know your listeners are,
more apartments,
more investment, oriented. And generally we have a better relationship with those because there's more information available publicly.
Right.
And, so,
and if they're going to do an improvement, they're going to typically pull permits.
Right.
And so,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you guys can go back and look at those. And what about on, in the market that we're in today with again, we don't do office, but in the office market where you have had a huge drop in the valuations based on income and vacancies. I mean, what has that done? I mean, how's that changed what you guys are doing? You're getting a lot of office owners, coming in saying, hey, my assessment's here, but based on, we're 30% vacant, we should be here.
Yeah. And that's with real estate markets, we're always trying to anticipate, the trajectory, what we saw in the latter part of 2008 and 9 is residential, actually all real estate kind of, falling.
Flattened out. Yeah.
But the last 10 years or so, we saw a decent, appreciation in prices. Residential's been doing well, even during these high interest rate years. We have a lot of theories on why, but we did anticipate things like downtown office markets and stuff declining. But trying to catch a falling knife is difficult, and trying to anticipate how far those values are falling when there aren't really sales happening.
Right. There's not any data points.
We see bankruptcies, foreclosures, but what is the value of that property, and so that's really the challenge that we have with our commercial market right now, is trying to figure out where the pockets of success are. Multifamily's been somewhat resilient and strong over the years.
Right.
Maybe that's softening a bit. I don't know. You might know better than me.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had a lot of transactions, so definitely in the 23 there's been a softening of that. Yeah. I mean, now that you see deals that are not transacting, you've got incomes that are flat, or some NOIs that have gone down with increasing expenses. So the question then becomes on the valuation. I get one thing, do you see in the office, are we seeing real market values going below the assessed values now?
Yeah, especially not with multifamily as much yet. We're seeing that more with office properties, especially downtown, where we've been aggressively trending those down. But we've got now record appeals of all kinds of properties.
Wow, okay.
And so we're constantly, reevaluating, those. We're getting better information. We're doing better analysis because we're actually talking with owners and reps and that sort of thing.
And the push then is to change the real market value and also change the assessed value to kind of start it down at a...
That's right. So, I mean, going back to the first couple of slides where I talked about the limitation on rate, this is where we get into a concept that is known as compression.
Right.
So when districts are trying to collect more than the constitutional limit of the $5 and $10 per thousand, we actually have to reduce the tax rate on a property to account for the amount over what the Constitution will allow. And so that math formula affects over 40,000 properties in Multnomah County last year. And that resulted in a reduction of over $110 million in revenue that the districts were trying to collect from those properties.
Got it.
So when you start seeing downward trend markets, that's really where you start seeing more of that limitation come into play, especially on properties where their tax value is pretty close to the market value.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So as those market values go down, you're going to see.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Got it. And then you've got municipalities or districts having funding issues, and because of the lack of, how much, I was curious, in Multnomah County, do you know the percentage of tax revenue that comes from, the downtown core versus, outside of that I don't know if you guys do it by segment, by property type.
Yeah, I mean, the rule is that residential supports about 65% of the tax base. So that's everything else is in that 25 to 35% range. Okay. And so we don't really break it out by. We don't analyze the market that way,
right?
Because we're not trying to figure out those types of numbers, but that's more of an economist type thing. We're trying to figure out the market so that we can get those values right. Because if we get the market value wrong on a property that has the compression limitation on it, it's multiplied by, it could have been higher and they could have collected more revenue.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where we're focused in those types of markets where we're, constantly dealing with downward trends in certain segments. But yeah, no, I mean, to answer your question, residential carries the bulk of the lion's share,
the bulk of the property tax revenue that comes in.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So in terms of, let's talk about new construction. It's kind of an interesting thing because we've had a lot of new construction. How that tax kind of differs and how that's going to work. I've got a piece of land. I'm going to put I'm building something. Is there a way to kind of figure out where we think the taxes are going to fall? What's the kind of the step for that? Yeah, that's a pretty common question, especially if a developer is looking to build or an investor. What's my anticipated tax is usually the question. And we sort of have to walk through how Oregon property tax timelines work, right? So all property is valued as of January 1. Okay. Right. So it's the status of the property on January 1. As of January 1. So if you're partially complete, we pick up the value of the partial improvements, which is a very tough task, which is why in law, we always remind folks that if they're building commercial property, there is a construction in process exemption for 2 years while you're constructing. Right. So we don't pick up partial improvements and kind of. It's just too hard to guesstimate. Is it 35%, 40%? So you've got a 2-year. Right. So usually we really remind folks of that, but it really. And do they have to go and apply for that, or what? They do. They do. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They come to our office, or our website has a lot of great information on the exemption. So just give us a call or look it up. So for a project that's going to last over a calendar year, it's good to go in and get the exemption. And that's right. Got it. Okay. Yeah. And then so when it's complete, hopefully by the following January 1, then we're picking up a completed improvement. Gotcha. Now, what existed prior to the new construction is land. And so those values all kind of stay the same. And we're looking at the contributory value of the new property. So the improvements are going on top of the land. That's right. Okay. And so we come up with a value, and then that becomes the basis for how we increase the property's maximum assessed value above that 3% limit you were talking about. That's where it gets a little tricky. That's where we bring into another concept, which is known as the change property ratio, right? Which is another constitutional, embedded idea that says basically when you're adding property after the original 1997 date. So this is property built after 97. Right. Okay. You're looking at its value, its market value, multiplied by a ratio of the average maximum assessed value to real market value for all property within that's similar within that area. So when you say similar, is that the city? Is that how tight? I mean, what is that area? Yeah, so this is Multnomah County's unique aspect to this, where we have, usually it's by county. Okay. Multnomah County is the only county that has it by city and county. So we have 5 cities. Cities within the county. That have their own area definition. So we have their change property ratios. And the county has one as well for everything else. So does Washington County just do one just for Washington County? Just one for Washington County. It doesn't. Okay, Beaver and Hillsborough. Right. Right. Okay. Nope. The Oregon statute doesn't allow it. It only allows it for Multnomah. And so we have those kind of unique properties, and that kind of confuses folks who are building in Clackamas or Washington. And they come here, and we say, well, where is it being constructed? So then we have to look at that. So I'll just give you an example. Okay. The multifamily ratio is about 35%. Okay. Right? So that means MAVs to market values are 35%. So if you've got a $1 million apartment complex, you can expect the MAV to go up by $350,000. That's 35%. So you would multiply the million times the 0.35, and that would give you the $350,000 that you would add to the existing MAV, right? Got it. So that's basically the formula, figuring out which ratio applies. Residential is right around 50%. Commercial is in that 35 to 50%. And they can go and find the ratio. And it's online on our website. Okay, got it. Okay, we've got it all out there. Okay. Yep. So again, it's for projects that are going to go over a year. I know some builders we've talked to and who are in the single family world and kind of forgot about, hey, we can get that exemption for 2 years. They're so used to just kind of turning them out in a year, and not overly concerned about the tax value, because they're not typically when they're going to sell for sale product. They're going to, the taxes are going to get paid by this. So it's good for builders. And again, if it's a bigger project, you go over a year, get the exemption in Multnomah County for a couple of years, and then you guys come in at that point and try to
Right. So
Okay.
we're not out there on every property in January 1. Obviously, it's a season. We're out. Where appraisers are going out there figuring out what was there as of January 1. We develop our values, and then we go through the formula of increasing the property's maximum assessed value.
And the change ratio, that's on anything new. It doesn't matter product type. It's single family, multifamily, office.
Anything new. Right.
And that's part of that statute.
That's right.
Interesting. Okay. And then I know we've talked about some items that can exempt or, not limit the 3%. What are those, things within that, doing your property?
So not trigger the increase. Right. Yeah. So maintenance and repair usually are the big ones, and this is more of single family. So anytime you go out and maintain your roof or replace a window, or you're not going to expect a trigger to the increase. That's common. That's expected. Maintaining the value as is. It's only when you're adding value, and I'm really simplifying this because there are some tricky sort of scenarios out there. But when you're adding value to the property, whether it's commercial or residential, that's when we start asking the question of, is this new property?
Gotcha.
So we want to make sure we're not double taxing old property by increasing it for the old property, but we want to make sure that if it's new property that was not previously captured in the maximum assessed value, that we're going
to pick it up based on
right.
Okay.
That's right, yeah.
Right. So if you're doing an addition, you've got a multifamily property, you've got extra land, you're going to build a new building on that extra land, that'll trigger the reassessment. If you're going to do roof or siding, that's probably not.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so ongoing maintenance is not a condition of.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Sometimes we'll get folks who remodel a kitchen and take out vinyl and put in marble, and they'll add another room, and they'll build out the basement, and they'll say it was maintenance. And so sometimes we have to have a little further discussion about, are you actually maintaining it, or did you add a bunch of value to resell it for higher than what you bought it for? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We get it. We're all taxpayers. We want to try to minimize our tax bill. We're not certainly there to get the highest tax bill. We're just trying to make sure we get the math.
And is there a threshold in terms of improvements? Is it 25% of the value, or what? Is there a way that kind of trigger something on your guys' end?
There is a law. The original law was written that it was $10,000 in 1 year, or $25,000 over 5 consecutive years.
Wow. Okay.
So. That law is changed to, and I don't have the exact numbers because they indexed it. I believe it's $25,000 in 1 year, and something like $45,000 or $50,000 over a period of time. So, we can get you the exact information, but basically the triggers are higher than they were in '97. And that makes sense. In the hearing itself at the legislature, they were saying a $10,000 addition is like a new refrigerator nowadays. It's not
exactly.
Yes. So they inflated that. They indexed it essentially. So if the value of that increase is more than $25,000 or whatever that number is, that's when we would be adding more value.
And reassessing the gotcha.
Correct.
And trigger that. Okay.
That's right.
So I got it. Okay. So like I said, a reposition of a property where we're going inside, just painting, new flooring, that's probably not going to trigger it. But if we substantial improvements of some percentage of the value is going to send it over.
Right.
Got it. Okay. So then I'm curious on what are the Are the Multnomah County overly concerned about the lack of tax revenue coming in because of the change in valuations on the office specifically?
Yeah,
because that's something we've talked about in various cities, and what are they going to do as their downtown core valuations are going down? What does that do to the tax revenue?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot more economists giving me calls from the jurisdictions, so the city and the county, trying to get a feel for where it's going, because that's exactly right. There's anticipated to be an erosion in those tax bases, due to the decrease in values of the high-rise office in the downtown core areas. There's other areas around the county, but that's where everyone's focused right now. The good news is that, and this was what I was saying about 3 years ago when we saw the pandemic hit and everything go vacant, basically because the taxable value for a commercial property was about half of what market value was at the time. So that ratio I was talking about was about 50%, a little less. We were talking to folks about, we had a few years of market declines before it actually eclipsed.
Got to that.
That's right.
Right, okay.
So that's what we were saying 2-3 years ago. Right. Now we're saying we're there and we're passing it in many situations. So that's where what you're seeing now is not only the market values becoming the assessed values, which reduces the taxes collected, but compression now comes into in a huge way.
Right.
Because the tax limit's based on $15 per thousand. And when we have taxes that are close to 27 per thousand of assessed value and now market value and assessed value, you could see many thousands of dollars being compressed. Oh, well, 110 million actually this year. So that's being an issue. But another saving factor here is residential holds about 65% of the tax base. So
you're not seeing that amount of compression on the single family residential
We're seeing
side?
some, but not as much because values have been resilient. And, it sort of defied my expectation. I thought when rates went up, 7-8%, we would see, but inventory was limited. So we had other factors kind of affect the economics, right? So that's what we were analyzing.
So when we first had the like during COVID, when we had some of the valuations in the office, because their market value was so far above the assessed value, there was no kind of rush to reassess, so to speak. But now that they're there, we've got the compression. That's what's going on.
3 years ago, we were actually reducing values. Yeah. I think we started at 15%. We had no sales, but we were sort of we were doing our own income approaches and seeing vacancy rates, doing our own cap rate increase for risk, And so then we saw some sales that were justifying maybe another 25% in the following year. And this year, I think we were in the 15 to 20%. The problem is, I have to be able to justify it. I can't just go into the market and say, I feel like it's a 50% decline. I have to show
you need some
support.
Data points.
I need data. Yeah, exactly.
And we've had limited amount of data points in the last year. So, I think that's going to pick up. So it'll be interesting to see where that. Do the other counties in Oregon, again, we do a lot of business in Portland and Washington County. What's their very similar, though, just less districts? Is how you would look? Yeah,
so we actually have fewer districts, if you can imagine that, where a lot of the rural counties will have more.
Oh, interesting.
So like Deschutes County, I think, has somewhere in the low hundreds,
Wow, okay.
And that's probably because there's more rural property, so they have districts that are more spread out.
For the
right.
Got it.
And we're not as, big as, say, Malheur County, but we have the most accounts out of any county, and we're not as spread out. So everything's more consolidated and compressed within smaller markets. That's why. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, is there? What keeps you up at night in terms of this tax? We've talked before, but what's coming into 24 where we are? What's worrying your side?
Yeah, for me, it's the challenge of making sure we get the math right. And the laws every year are changing. New properties being exempted that previously wasn't. New properties come on the market that weren't there 30 years ago, like ADUs. We're always trying to figure out how to best
figure that in.
how to value those and get them on the roll for the districts, and just make sure we get the inventories right. So what really keeps me up is our computer system, making sure it does what. like every executive, is it doing what I think it's doing?
Right.
And so we get errors, and it drives me insane. That I have 300,000 tax statements going out, and there could be a certain segment are wrong because the system didn't collect it. But we want folks to know that we're here to answer questions. We want it to be fair. If we're people, we get it wrong, and so I'll state it right up front. If we made a mistake, we'll fix it. But that requires some working with us, giving us information, allowing us to come on the property, that sort of thing. Every year is a different set of challenges. I think right now we sort of have an anticipation of where the market's headed.
Right.
Since January 1 has just passed, we kind of know what we're shooting for. Maybe next January 1, it presents a new set of circumstances. What's the summer sales season going to look like? Are more sales going to come on the market? And the properties that have rebounded well, like industrial was resilient, residential did well. Are they now going to face a decline? These are kinds of things that we're trying to look for, sort of that canary that says this is coming. Right. And so get ready and, get the information together and that sort of thing.
On the new construction of multifamily with like inclusionary zoning, where you have a portion that are affordable, are you factoring that into the market value?
Yeah, so if they've qualified for an exemption, for instance, that would apply to the portion of the property that's residential and not to anything else. So we're constantly working with the city who actually administers the program.
Okay.
So they handle the application, the approval, the reviews, and then once they approve it, we get the information to apply
to the factor of the
to the
risk.
account, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we make sure that whatever is exempted on the tax statement, and then we educate owners on what the impacts will be after the 10-year abatement is
or
over.
where the projection could be. Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, thanks for taking the time to do this. Like I said, it's very complicated. We get a lot of questions about the reassessment. I think we've got some. I think a lot of developers reminding them, hey, it's a bigger project. To get that exemption through, make sure you get that paperwork in, and just an understanding of where the real market value is versus the tax assessed value and how that plays out. So it's very enlightening, and I know your hands are full. So thanks for taking the time to do this, and we'll see you next time on HFO TV.
Appreciate it, Greg.
Thank you.
you.
That was great. No, very good. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.